So the program, welcome everybody. The program portion of our meeting tonight will run to about 7:30, and we have Tom and Mike here from LA Democracy Vouchers, which is very interesting campaign finance reform proposal. So gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Mike, do you want to kick things off and introduce us real quick, and then I'll run through the PowerPoint?
Sure. First off, thanks everyone for having us. We're really grateful to be here. I'm Mike Draskovic, he, him. I'm a co-founder of this group, LA for Democracy Vouchers. Our mission is to bring about campaign finance reform to the city of Los Angeles. In another capacity, I'm also co-founder of a group called the Democracy Policy Network, which raises up transformative policy ideas for state legislators, their staff, and advocates. It's where Tom and I met, and Tom produced our kit on democracy vouchers. So, thanks again for having us here.
Great, and like Mike said, my name is Latkowski. I'm co-founder of LA for Democracy Vouchers. Is my audio okay for everyone? I just want to make sure I'm not having any internet problems. Okay, perfect. Great, well, thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just jump right in. Can everyone see some PowerPoint slides here? Excellent. Great. So again, we're LA for Democracy Vouchers. We've been organizing for the last year, a little over a year now, to try and reform LA's campaign finance system. And we started that by kind of doing a deep dive into what is the campaign finance system today and what are the problems with it. So we looked at the 2020 races in LA City. And of course, there were 7 of the 15 city council seats were up, 4 school board races. In total, there were about $32 million in political spending in 2020. And so first, we just wanted to answer some basic questions. Where did that money come from? So here's where I imagine folks think the money came from. So of course, this is LA. You can see, different dots here are different zip codes. Of course, bigger dots had more money from that zip code. This is what I imagine folks expect. Here's where the money actually came from, all across the United States. So big chunks in the Northeast over here, some money coming in from the South and Midwest. There's this giant dot in Utah. It's coming in, money is coming in from all across the country into LA city politics. All told, a majority of the money, in fact, about 70%, came from zip codes that are not in LA City. And so just to highlight 2 of those here, the single biggest giving zip code in the 2020 races was Park City, Utah, where one donor gave nearly $3 million to some of the school board races. Another top giving zip code here, Bentonville, Arkansas, which if you've heard of as anything, you might know that's where Walmart is headquartered. So these are folks from all across the country who apparently care about LA politics and are spending their money to influence our politics. So this breaks down the source of the money another way. Again, this orange section is the 70% from outside. But even the money that remains, that comes from within the city, a good chunk of that comes from special interests that are based in the city. And so really, we're just left with these 2 little slivers. This dark blue comes from people, individuals who live in Los Angeles. And then here, this is the existing matching funds program. But we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to say, okay, when the money comes from within the city, where is it coming from, right? Is it coming from a representative cross-section? Well, no. You'll probably not be surprised to hear the answer is no. On the left here, these are the demographics of LA. So each of these little different blocks is a zip code. On the left, the darker orange has a higher percent people of color. And so the lighter orange, like West LA, you can see here, tend to be whiter zip codes. And on the right, this shows the donations per capita. And as you can see, it's basically the exact reverse, right? Money, when it comes from within LA City at all, it's coming from the whitest and often the wealthiest parts of the city. And LA is 70% people of color. So that is not at all representative. And so we care about money, but ultimately we care about how it affects who wins races, right? Who serves on our city council, who's making the decisions for the city. So we looked back at the last 100 years of city council members. So this graphic shows each new person to join the city council by the decade they joined. And we just wanted to answer some basic questions to see how the role the campaign finance system is playing and who serves on the council. So breaking this down by race, you can see early on, as you might expect, it's disproportionately white. But even recently, we're in a city that's 70% people of color with a disproportionately white council. And the reason this is relevant to campaign finance is studies have consistently shown that our existing campaign finance system benefits white folks, wealthy folks, and benefits men. And we're seeing that in the raw campaign finance data, and we're seeing that in the election outcomes. Here we break it down by gender. If anything, the picture is even more stark. You can see, LA, of course, is about 50% women. But right now we only have 3 women serving on our 15-person city council. So that's just an example of some of the effects of this. So the big question is, what can we do? One option is end Citizens United, which is a great idea, but it's also a big task. And so we don't want to pin all of our hopes there. It's not something that Los Angeles can accomplish on its own. Another idea is 100% public financing. So that would mean just ban all private money and give public money instead. Just get rid of these problems altogether. But again, Supreme Court says that's unconstitutional. So that's not something LA City can do on its own either. A third option is matching funds. And LA does this now. Basically, small donations to city council candidates get matched at a 6-to-1 rate. The idea is to help amplify the power of small donors. And that helps, but clearly it's not addressing the full problem, right? Ultimately, it's those wealthy white folks often whose donations are getting matched. And so that's not addressing the problem. So our solution comes from existing policy in Seattle. It's called Democracy Vouchers. The basic idea is to give every city resident money in the form of these vouchers to give to campaigns. So right here in this picture, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but right here in this picture, you can see a democracy voucher from Seattle's 2017 elections. And Seattle residents had the option to give their vouchers to candidates for mayor, for city attorney, or for city council. So this does a few things. First of all, to state the obvious, anyone can donate. Under the current system in Los Angeles, you have to have disposable income to donate. You have to often, already be politically engaged to even think about donating. With democracy vouchers, that changes. Anyone from any background can donate. For candidates, it's also a game changer because it means you no longer need to have a wealthy network to be able to run a competitive campaign. Now, and we've seen this in Seattle, any network can be used as a fundraising network. So candidates literally will go door to door, and that will be their fundraising, instead of spending hours on the phone with the wealthiest donors in the city. And the final note here is, because it's an optional program for candidates, that means when cities pass democracy vouchers, they can impose some extra rules. So this includes lowering contribution limits, putting spending limits on voucher campaigns, and requiring candidates who take vouchers, who take this public money, to attend public debates. So as I said, this exists now in Seattle. It first passed in 2015 in a ballot initiative, and it's been used 3 times since then. It was just used recently last year. And in November, Seattle elected their first mayor to run using democracy vouchers. The program was supported by the groups you might expect, by Democrats, by progressive groups. There was some tacit opposition, but honestly, I think most folks in Seattle, and from talking to the reformers there, folks identified that there was a need for reform. And so those who did oppose it didn't feel like they could do so publicly. And so often there was kind of private opposition, but mostly there was broad public support. So jumping ahead, let's look at some of the results here. Donors in Seattle are more diverse than they were before. And that's by race, by income, and by age. There was a great study out of Seattle before vouchers existed that showed that one of the best predictors of whether or not someone would be a cash donor under the old system was whether or not they lived in a house with a view of the water. And if they did, they were probably going to donate, and otherwise they would probably not. And so, of course, that selects for the wealthiest, often for white folks, but that's no longer true. In Seattle now, donations come from all parts of the city. Donors are more diverse across each of these categories. Another question is, how does it work for candidates? Can candidates win against big money? Won't the wealthy, won't the big corporations always have more money? Well, the 2019 city council races were a perfect example. The city council at the time, the Seattle City Council, was debating some measures to put some taxes on Amazon, some other big companies to fund homeless service. And Amazon didn't like this and spent a lot of money to try and essentially replace the whole city council. You can see here this graphic from the Seattle Times about the unprecedented cash Amazon's putting in the city council races. And so this was a big question, right? Would candidates raising money from democracy vouchers be able to win against candidates who were backed by Amazon? And the answer was yes. So there were 7 city council races that year, and 6 winners used vouchers. And in the end, only 1 Amazon-backed candidate won. So what this kind of shows is that even if voucher candidates can't always outraise Amazon, the voucher candidates aren't setting fundraising records, but they're able to raise enough money to get their message out and at least have a competitive shot to win. And final slide here, and then we can open it up for questions and kind of give our next steps for what we're doing in LA. But this is the final result I want to emphasize from Seattle. And I think it's maybe the least well-known and maybe the most important. And this is how democracy vouchers affect political culture. So this is a picture here of Jakari Brown, who we first heard about from an NPR story in Seattle. He was a campaign staffer, a top fundraiser for some mayoral and city council candidates, formerly homeless himself, but went on to work for candidates working to end homelessness in Seattle. This was his pitch to people when he was fundraising. I say, you maybe got a second or two to help the homeless. This is the free democracy voucher program where everyone in the city gets $100 to donate to the campaign. And this was how these campaigns did their fundraising, right? Was having the candidate or having campaign staffers talk to folks on the street or go door to door, and they would do fundraising that way. And so this is huge, both in the connections that are valuable now are not just the ones to the wealthiest folks in the city, but it's also huge for the folks at the other end of this conversation, right? Many of whom have never talked to a candidate before, or no one's ever knocked on their door before because they're seen as an unlikely voter or someone who's not going to donate. But with democracy vouchers, that's different. And so what Seattle has found is that low propensity voters and non-voters, when they use a voucher, they become 6 to 10 times more likely to vote. And what we think is happening there is these are people who, maybe before they said, oh, all the politicians are the same, or they don't care about me, but now someone is at their door. They're there because they want the democracy vouchers, but they're at their door, they have that conversation, and they're asking you for something, right? The voter is put in a position of power because they have these vouchers that they can now donate. And that kind of changes the psychology there and leads people to engage in other ways. So really those are the 3 benefits we see to vouchers: the more diverse donors, helping candidates run even without the wealthy connections, and changing the political culture. So I'm going to stop screen sharing here. And maybe Mike, do you want to speak for a moment to kind of our next steps, what we're doing in LA, and then maybe we can take questions if there's time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the plan right now is to see if we can bring democracy vouchers to the city via ballot measure in 2024. So we're spending the next 6 to 8 months researching it further, in addition to some other policies that we may want to consider bundling with it. So things like ranked choice voting, banning contributions from foreign influence corporations, redistricting, a few other ideas. The end of the year will be coalition recruitment, and then 2023 will be working with the coalition to finalize the policies. So we have a list of questions we've put together on democracy vouchers that Tom and I aren't answering. We're going to put to the coalition to decide, what's the dollar amount, how many vouchers do we want sent out, that type of thing. And then the remainder of 2023 will be gathering signatures, and then 2024 would be essentially GOTV for the prop. This all to say we're also working with a few folks at City Hall to see if we can move these ideas there. So we don't want to rule that out, but we think the most likely case here is that it has to be run as a citizen initiative. Yeah, so again, thanks so much for having us today.
Happy to answer any questions. We also have lots more resources on Democracy Vouchers. I actually wrote a book on Democracy Vouchers. I can put the link if anyone wants to check that out, but there are all sorts of free resources online too. But while we're here, if there's more time, we're happy to take questions, clarify anything about the program, talk about our next steps in LA, any of that.
Great. So I'm going to take my sort of prerogative as host to give you guys two questions. And then anyone else can raise their hands and I will call on you. The first is we're, interested primarily in Culver City politics here. Most of us don't get to vote in the city of LA. So please let us know what ways we can support you. And question number two, sort of the brother of the first question, is what's the strategy of trying to do this in the biggest city first and not trial it in Culver City or West Hollywood or Santa Monica or someplace like that?
Yeah. So to your first your first question, right now we're just trying to go to as many groups as possible in the area. Once we're in the GOTV stage, of course, it'll be very focused on folks who can actually vote on the measure. But right now, our big goal is just to get connected to more groups, find more advocates who might be willing to engage with this, and just kind of spread the ideas too, right? So the policy only exists now in Seattle, but there are folks in cities, other cities in California and across the nation that are pursuing this or looking at ballot measures, or the council in their city looking at it. So part of our goal is just to spread the idea. To your second question, we're both from Los Angeles, which was the major impetus for working there. Is that's the city that we're in. There's no reason that Culver City or Santa Monica couldn't do something similar though. But Mike and I are just particularly familiar with the problems of LA politics, and that's where our passion is to reform that. And certainly LA won't be the first to do this, right? We have the great model out of Seattle. And LA has its existing matching fund system too, which, while imperfect, shows the value of spending a tiny fraction of the city budget, less than 0.1%, spending some public money to ensure better campaigns. So we have that proof of concept there, and just want to take it into this better system.
I'll just say, if there's anyone on this call or anyone folks know here that would be interested in running with this in Culver City, please have them reach out. We are in touch with a lot of the national groups and other statewide groups, city groups in the state working on this. And so we can share everything we've learned and the best practices and all of that to get started.
Great. So I see Leah Pressman, then Nancy Barba, then Rick Tuttle, then Ron Ostrin, then Ronnie and/or Tom, if we have time for all four of y'all. So Leah, go ahead, please.
Okay. So just to clarify, how would this work? Just thinking about Culver City, candidates apply for the endorsement of the police department and police union. And the union isn't, they do contribute towards campaigns, but they also campaign as a PAC that doesn't coordinate. And how would this affect PACs, or would it?
Yeah, so big picture, we're limited in what we can do because of Citizens United and because of other Supreme Court decisions, right? So this is we're playing with a limited hand to begin with in terms of the reforms that we have, right? So we're not aiming for a silver bullet here. So this doesn't stop PACs from spending money. That's just not part of the policy. But what it does is it says, if you're a candidate who is not supported by the existing, the powers that be, by the special interests, you now will have your own path to fundraising, right? And so it's less about stopping the existing funding that's happening, and more about creating an alternative path where grassroots candidates can show their public support and win that way.
And so if someone's getting supported by a PAC, they would not be eligible for these funds?
Yeah. So under our policy, and this is what's neat about having it be an opt-in program, right, is that candidates can choose whether or not they want to take vouchers. If you don't, that's fine. Run your campaign the old way. But if you do want to take vouchers, you literally will sign a contract with the city agreeing to some of these terms, such as not taking corporate contributions. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay, Nancy Barba.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I added my question to the chat box, but I'll repeat it. I didn't know which one to do. So can you remind me who's funding the democracy vouchers in Seattle? And also, who do you anticipate funding them in, let's say, Los Angeles?
Sure. Yeah. So in Seattle, the program costs about $3 million a year. And the funding mechanism in the proposition in 2015, it was a small property tax increase. I don't remember the precise number, but it was at the time, at least, it was the smallest property tax increase in the city's history. The program is about 0.06% of the city budget. So not negligible, but small compared to many other things. So in terms of who would fund it in Los Angeles, we've estimated it would be about $15 million a year for LA City. We haven't settled on one funding option. Ultimately, that's a decision we want to make alongside our inevitable coalition. Sort of like what Mike said about, how many vouchers, how many dollars per voucher. Those are questions that, we might have our thoughts on, but ultimately they're going to be decided alongside the coalition. So what I would say though, is it's not gonna bankrupt the city, right? Sometimes folks hear, giving people money and dramatically inflate how much it would cost. We're talking about like 0.1% of the city budget here. So yeah, we will find a funding source. We're not settled on that yet, but it's very doable to find that.
Rick Tuttle.
Thank you, and thank you for this intriguing idea, gentlemen. I have a compound question, so let me just bring it in, and then you can break it down as you like. Am I correct then that if it's 15 million a year, City of LA with 15 council districts, that and it would, the elections are every 2 years for 8 or 7 seats, then what we're probably talking about, or what you're talking about, is $2 million in budget set aside. In other words, the city would have, I'm using sort of budget language here, the city would have exposure, legal exposure, legally, I mean, all perfectly appropriate if this all, $2 million available for, I'll pick an easy number, 8 council seats. In other words, that it could, theoretically, they would hit the budget wall unless you roll money over from previous years. And I assume someone will think of that. So when it's underused, you could start having a pool of $3 million, $4 million over the next, say, 5 or 6 years. Let me stop for a minute and see, do I have that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And of course, in theory, we would include the mayoral race as well. Folks would be able to choose.
I'm not taking you there because I don't need to come.
Sure.
Okay, well, let me go to the next thing. And then I'll stop because other people may have things to talk about. So in Seattle, and this is a compound question within the second question, is Seattle apples to apples with what you're proposing, basically?
In terms of cost?
No, in other words, it's the Seattle, if people like in this group, and this is a pretty high powered group, by the way, people were to look closely at Seattle, which you've demonstrated, is this essentially what you gentlemen are proposing?
Yes, yeah, more or less the same. There are some specific details that we would tweak, having seen how that's gone, but yes, yeah, so the large part is the.
My second question is, and this is something you may not have gotten to, but based on the Seattle experience, what in their races, the council races there, the councilors, I guess you say they call themselves, races there, what would your projection be on the Los Angeles races as how much would be raisable, how's that for a phrase, from these vouchers in a competitive, where someone campaigned to the vouchers, sign the contract and campaign? How much are we talking about? $50,000, $300,000, $20,000? What's the experience been based on the past effort?
Yeah, in Seattle, we've seen city council candidates raising hundreds of thousands of dollars in vouchers, which is well within the confines of the city budget, but is huge for a campaign, right?
No,
And they're doing that just by going and knocking on doors, right? If you can,
well, that's what I'm asking.
knock on 100 doors a day, you can start raising substantial sums pretty quickly.
You may not have done it then, but in other words, if you would project it from Seattle to Los Angeles, allowing a little for inflation or deflation, I'm not sure quite where we'll be, but assuming it's about the same, and you'll have a chance to do this, I'll just leave it as a question. Would your projection be that a candidate who earnestly undertook this effort, signed the contract not to take the corporate money, et cetera, could raise $150,000, $1 million? It's a possibility to go per candidate all the way to a couple of million in this plan. And I'm just trying to, I'll leave you with that. I'll leave it with an open question, but just see where I'm going with it.
Sure. Yeah, and we don't have precise projections on that yet, to answer your question.
Thanks.
What we will do, one component of the Seattle program that we want to keep in Los Angeles is the overall spending caps on candidates, right?
Yeah.
So if you sign up for the Democracy Vouchers program, you're capped in how much your total campaign can cost, because we're not trying to help candidates set fundraising records. We're just helping you to fund a competitive campaign through this grassroots means.
And that's what a candidate of the type you're looking for, a progressive, very liberal candidate, will look for. And that is, well, you can win. You don't have to have superiority to win in fundraising, but you have to have sufficiency. That's a standard phrase. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, well, we're at 7:29, so I'm going to call it because we do have quite a bit of business to take care of tonight. I appreciate you guys sharing this idea with us. I think it's a, very interesting program and an excellent presentation.
We want to give money. How do we do that?
Yes, please look at the links in the chat. Am I correct that your book is free?
The book is $5 for an ebook or $10 for a physical, so almost free. Cheap for sure, but we have plenty of free resources online as well, and I can post some of those in the chat.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Please,
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Business meeting if you want, but I can't guarantee that it will be. It's a business meeting. So let me see if I can unspotlight you. Okay, so I think that's. Oh, now I can end the recording as well.